This is a Beyond Castorber's podcast, available on iTunes, Audio Boom, Stitcher.com, Player FM, and BeyondCastorbers.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Beyond Castorber's with me, Christian Cawley. And over there, the posh chap is James McLean, who is currently enjoying some very expensive beer in a very particular type of ancient pewter tankard.
It's not grog.
We are talking, as you probably gathered by the title of this podcast, we're going to be talking about Star Wars. Largely stuff surrounding Rogue One, but we'll be floating off in other directions. We do want to talk about Rogue One properly in detail. And once our friend Brian Terranova is up to speed with Rogue One, we'll probably do that. Just as a quick intro to the movie, which, you know, we call it Rogue One. Its official title is Rogue One: A Star Wars Story. It's the first of several Star Wars spin-offs, and it takes place between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, which is the revised title for the original Star Wears movie in 1977, and it goes directly into the events of A New Hope. I'm interested to know, obviously we'll talk about it in more detail later on. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it was a little slow at first, I thought. I thought the opening was a bit drawn out and a bit predictable. It was beautifully done, but it was still a bit of a tried and tested trope of the Western sort of outback, or, normally the British people coming to take someone away. I don't know.
It was, wasn't it? It was a Britain coming to take people away.
It was a colonial feel to it, but that's fine. I mean, it's very Star Wars. I mean, Star Wars in its very essence is sort of colonial, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Wild West and the British colonial bastards with the droids as the slaves, and you can go with your allegories as far as you like. But anyway, point being, yeah, it was okay. I enjoyed it. I thought the ending was daring. I thought the characters, by and large, worked.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'd largely agree with that. Obviously, we'll bat that out in more detail for a future podcast. But there are a couple of surprise appearances in there, aren't there, from people we weren't expecting. For instance, there's some lovely. There's a sequence towards the end which is pretty much what you expect from a Star Wars movie. It's lots of X-wings in space. Mm-hmm. And there's kind of three key moments of kind of CGI in there.
Right.
This isn't so much CGI, but it is clever use of footage. This is the old footage that was reused, that wasn't used in Star Wars, that I'm talking about initially. So you've got Gold Leader, who was in Star Wars in the attack on the Death Star. He's in there, flying around in these non-X-wing craft, whatever the craft that they're using are. That guy's in there. There's one or two others in there, which I thought was a nice way of using people. It places the movie nicely, I think, in that if you haven't already got it, it just adds to that whole feeling that's created within the movie's atmosphere of taking place in that era of Star Wars, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So you've got that. You've also got, I'm going to do these in order of kind of how impressed I was by them. Okay, so you've then got, and there are spoilers in this discussion, so tread carefully. You probably know about this anyway. You've then got a 19-year-old Carrie Fisher as well, haven't you?
Mm-hmm.
Right at the end, who works kind of well, but does feel a bit too much like a video game character for me. And I think she only says one word, doesn't she? But I may be wrong about that. So you've got that, and then you've got the main event of CGI magic in Rogue One, which is the recreation of Grand Moff Tarkin.
Yeah.
Which felt more real to me than the Leia. How did you feel about those two?
I had no issue whatsoever.
Where's the real James McLean?
No, I had no issue with it whatsoever. I didn't. I thought if you weren't aware that Peter Cushing was dead. You might have thought that the shots might look a bit odd. You might have thought they've touched him up for wrinkles, or you might have thought he, I don't know, that he had a bad set of makeup on, or I don't know, but I don't think it would have been a big issue. It's because it causes the issue. And the same with Carrie Fisher. Again, I don't think it's that bad. I think it's because it's not her, which obviously makes you start looking at the eyes and trying to see whether the eyes are the soul of the artist in them, and or that malarkey, or whether Peter Cushing's lines are quite right. I had more issue with Darth Vader's gait, which was sort of very verging on essential, the way he walked. He was a hips man, and that to me was a little more, a bit more out of place to me than Cushing or Fisher. So I think again it depends whether you're overlooking at things. Obviously, I'm sure there's no doubt that it wasn't perfect. Like I said, you would probably notice there was something a little odd if you were looking, but it's because we know it's wrong. But I thought it was good. I mean, they did, in both cases, they did the back shot first, as if sort of saying, we could do it like this. We're not going to show you who it is. We're just going to allude to it. How are you feeling about that? And I'm sure a lot of the audiences were going, I kind of wish we could just see who it was, because we know they're dead or old and we can't, I wish we could. And so they do it. They go, right, okay, cards on the table. Here's our bash. Here's our go at doing that. And I think in both cases it worked. And I think in both cases it was probably necessary. I think if those characters were characters in a film rather than characters from a film 40 years ago which you couldn't replicate, they would have had those shots in there. If Leia was a brand new character that was going to segue into the next film, you'd have to have her face there. Likewise, Cushing's role as Tarkin was integral to the Death Star, and it would have felt like you were sort of having to, for obvious reasons, push him to the side and have to justify the fact that Tarkin has little role in the Death Star until suddenly he starts striding around it in Episode 4. So I think both of them were needed. I think both of them were the right call, and I think they both did fairly good jobs. So,
okay, if you're interested or if you're curious, the actress whose body doubled for Carrie Fisher, the 19-year-old Carrie Fisher, is called Ingvild Dale, and she is from Norway, and she's about 30. You didn't see her because she was wearing special kind of hood and had dots all over her face and cameras mounted around her, which is how they were able to pull off the amazing CGI. On the other hand, you may know the actor playing Peter Cushing, playing Grand Moff Tarkin, and that's Guy Henry of Holby City fame. He's also Pius Thickness in the Harry Potter movies. Guy Henry's Henrik Hansen in Holby City. He's the hospital administrator. He's a very sort of a muted, stiff character in Holby, and he has those same cheekbones and almost the same hairline as Peter Cushing. It's quite surprising when you compare the photos.
He does the voice as well, doesn't he?
I think he does the voice, yeah.
Yeah, which I thought was pretty impressive. Some people have said it wasn't quite right, but it
wasn't
worked.
Far off. It wasn't far
yeah.
off.
I mean, some people had complaints about Vader, and that was James Earl Jones. And
yes, an old James Earl Jones.
Yes, he was obviously sounded too old.
I do feel as though they probably should have gone for one of the other Vaders, to be honest with you. How do you feel about that?
What other Vaders are we talking about?
Well, the video game Vaders or the cartoon Vaders.
Yeah. Saying that, I mean, I was pleased to see acknowledgements to the cartoons in there, both to Clone Wars and Rebels. That was a nice touch.
Yes.
They are, as I've said before, I think the Clone Wars is the best prequel to, the original Star Wars, and it deserves to have that canonization, which it is canon anyway. They've said that outright, but it's nice to see that inserted in there.
Was this the Forrest Whitaker character you're talking about?
Yes, yeah. And then for Rebels, you had their ship was in there, the Ghost, and also there was a very, very quick shot of Chopper was in there as well, and there was a voiceover Tannoy for one of the characters. So there's a few little nudges, and again, not wanting to go back to Doctor Who, that's sort of how you do it. You play little intercontinuity references which people who are looking for it can find, but doesn't affect the story for everyone else.
Yeah.
And I was really impressed with that. So yeah.
Was this the first Star Wars movie in which we've heard of kyber crystals?
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah.
Which was interesting.
Yeah, it was. I don't know if kyber crystals are mentioned in the old because I haven't read much Star Wars other than the original Timothy Zahn trilogy, Heir to the Empire.
Yes, I read that as well.
And I know there's crystals mentioned in there, but I can't remember whether they're called kyber crystals or not.
I'm not sure when kyber starts becoming referenced.
Yeah, no, I don't either. But the first time I came across it was in the Lego Star Wars, the Free Maker Adventures thing, which I mentioned last year on the podcast.
Well, they're mentioned quite heavily in the Clone Wars.
Right, okay.
I'm not sure. I mean, they talk about there being a crystal in them in Splinter in the Mind's Eye, the Alan Dean Foster original sequel to Star Wars book.
Right.
But I don't think they're named kyber crystals. I could be wrong. It's been years since I read it. And it is great. But just because again, I just love the whole sort of sexual relationship between Leia and Luke, just with the hindsight of knowing that they had no idea where it was going, and it was all going to end up, if you consider, and which they say it isn't for obvious reasons, it all goes horribly wrong.
Yes.
It's a funny thing, that, isn't it? It was one of the weirdest decisions I think I've ever seen in a film's sequels, was to make those two brother and sister. That was just so crazy, given the last two films, which were big, massive films. They weren't holiday specials, which you could try and hide away. They were major films, clearly showed a sexual tension between the two of them, which you had to not just undo in the third one, you had to actually have them acknowledge and undo as well. So it was a really, really weird sort of tangent for the series to go. I've never understood why he did that. That just seemed like utterly... I wonder if he looks back and thinks, no, that was a bad call. Yeah, that was definitely a bad call.
Is it a hangover from one of the earlier drafts that they're brother and sister? Because I don't remember. They're not brother and sister in the graphic novel, The Star Wars, or whatever it's called, which is based on an early script. They're not brother. I mean, there isn't a Luke, is it? Or there isn't a Leia. I forget now. There's an Anakin and there's another guy. There's a big green Han Solo. But I'm pretty sure there's no. Or there's two small children in there, isn't there? That are twins. So it's a development from that, I think.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
It's a funny. I mean, going back to Rogue One. Yeah, I like the characters. I liked again how, strangely again from Disney, there was another really strong female character who was not reliant on having to either be perfect or be romantically connected, or having to end up having to marry or have a child, which is usually the way that women have to go. I mean, the third option was actioned, which is obviously death. But
I think she's quite easily the most three-dimensional female in the Star Wars universe. I think.
Not that there's many to choose from.
No, indeed. But she's like, if someone had approached a draft of that script in a particular frame of mind, she could have ended up as a wisecracking female Han
in the
Solo.
Trailer, she seemed like that, and the trailer I loathed for that reason when she has that line, is because I'm a rebel or whatever it is, and they amputated that from the movie, and it was so much better for having her understate everything.
Yeah.
There was none of that sort of needing to prove herself, which made her a good character, because she was neither a strong man or woman character. She was just a strong character.
Yeah.
And they need to do that. And to be fair, Rey in The Force Awakens again has that same sort of strength, which I'm sure they will unravel in the next one.
Well, you don't know that.
But, well, I'm sure when they'll decide, the fans are going to want to see her romantically connecting with one of the characters there, so they'll start pushing down that road. But right now, she's good as she is, and just let her be as she is. But for Rogue One, I thought that was good, that she was strong, she was understated. And while there was a sort of obviously an attraction between the two characters in that, it wasn't foremost in the script. It had quite a lot of a sort of Japanese feel, that film, not just simply because of the sort of Seven Samurai sort of Kurosawa sort of elements to it, or the Zatoichi blind samurai element to it as well, but also in that fact that there was a sort of feel of that sort of attraction, but it wasn't played at the forefront, which I seem to see a lot of in Japanese films. I'm not saying that they're all like that. I'm not making any massive generic comment, but I tend to find they don't have that sort of forced structure that Hollywood has, and English films to some degree do as well. If it's a romantic film, it is a romantic film. If it's not a romantic film, it's not played at the front. And that's kind of how I felt Rogue One played. There was obviously a dynamic between the two, but it was never forefronted until it was pointless, to the point where it didn't mean anything. It was just a nice moment before they died.
Well, as I say, we're not going to go into too much detail on Rogue One because there's a few of you probably still haven't seen it, and we want to talk about it as a threesome.
Let's hope you haven't just listened to this thing, because that was it.
Indeed.
They all die.
Yeah. Well, most of them.
Most of them do.
Yeah.
Leia doesn't.
No.
Darth Vader doesn't. No.
Yeah.
Yoda doesn't.
Yeah, okay, let's leave it there. There's other stuff going on in the Star Wars universe, though, isn't there? We've got a new movie coming out later this year, Episode 8.
Mm-hmm.
So we're back to Rey and Finn and BB-8 and the other guy who flies the planes.
Mm-hmm.
And Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia.
Mm-hmm.
There's been some talk about, obviously Carrie Fisher sadly passed away a couple of weeks ago, so there's been sort of talk and speculation about how they're going to deal with that in the movies, which, for me, a bit too soon, to be honest with you. The movies are made, so there's not really a massive question there, is there?
No. Yeah, there is always this mix, isn't there? This mix of...
This is like that in Doctor Who, where people were concerned, what happens if the Doctor dies between episodes? The actor playing the Doctor dies between episodes. What are they going to do? I was like, Jesus Christ, what? Have you not got anything serious to worry about?
Yeah, it does feel a bit like that, doesn't it? It's a hard thing. I suppose the problem is in a lot of this stuff is that while people obviously some people are interested in Carrie Fisher because they followed her work and they legitimately have interest in her. There's those who obviously want to say they're sorry because she's passed away, and there's those who quite naturally, and I don't mean this in any critical way, for them the person they've been connected to all their lives has been Princess Leia. So the death of Carrie Fisher to them is quite shocking, because for them, in this weird world that we live in now, that character means more to them, or they have a more understanding of that character than they do real people. And that, again, as I say, is not critical. I think we all have that in some way. We know the history of the Doctor more than we do our next door neighbour. We naturally do create bonds with people who don't exist.
Well, our next door neighbours probably don't go on adventures through space and time.
No, well,
most of us
who knows? Absolutely, who knows? Hey, I'm sure there'll be a future Moffat episode where that sort of becomes a thing, where a small child discovers that his neighbour, this weird character called the Doctor, has a police box in the backyard.
It would not be the first time that an idea that's formed here ended up on Doctor Who.
But yeah, so I in some ways I feel sympathy for them when they're sort of going, oh my God, what will happen in the next film for Leia? Because you kind of think, well, I suppose in a sense to them, Leia is more real to them than Carrie Fisher. And at the same time you think, but there is also a level of etiquette involved here that may be social preference to say that you don't mention that on Facebook because people won't really get that or will feel that that's little. But I can sort of understand why some people are like that, even though, in the grand scheme of things, it's not the big issue here. It's, someone's passed away who means to be a lot of people who are genuinely upset, and especially people close to her. It must be hard if you are sort of part of that group, if you're part of that sort of core people who are sort of connected, like you see the posts of Mark Hamill, who sounds like he had a very strong friendship with Carrie Fisher. And it must be kind of weird, and to be involved in fandom and obviously sort of doing stuff with sort of doing sort of online shows and all stuff with, deals with fandom, to be aware that people are upset that Leia Organa is dead, even though she's not. And the fact that your friend Carrie Fisher's died, and all these people who are mourning, a large percentage of them are actually mourning not the person you know, but a character that to you would probably seem fairly trivial in comparison. It's a weird state of affairs.
It's like working with someone who then passes away, but that person is really well known because they maybe made a video about how to use a photocopier, and that became like viral in some way, and then that person dies, and like you then interact with people because you knew the person who made the photocopier video.
I think it's almost like if you knew someone who actually made shoes, and they died, and people came into you and said, "I'm so upset because those shoes were so good. You know, those shoes fit so well. No one will be able to make shoes like that again. They were the most perfect shoes." And in a weird way, it's a compliment because they're genuinely saying those shoes really fit. You know, they were unique. And people are sort of trying to say that to them, Carrie Fisher's layer is something so unique to them that it's really special. But at the same time, if you were the person who was the friend to Carrie Fisher, or the person who was friend to the person who died who made the shoes, how good the shoes were will suddenly seem really trivial. And
yeah. Okay,
it's yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Or the photocopy video thing, whatever one you want.
Yeah. So that's happening later this year, Star Wars Episode 8. We've also got, I don't know if you know this, dear listener, I'm sure James does. There's also this, oh Christ, I nearly called it Young Indiana Jones.
Young Han Solo.
Yes. There's the Young Han Solo thing as well. Which took me by surprise. To be honest, I thought they would go for Obi-Wan Kenobi. Not young Obi-Wan Kenobi, obviously, but Obi-Wan Kenobi in a kind. There's a novel called Kenobi, which James probably is aware of. Have you read it?
No.
No. And basically, it's set between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, and it basically establishes Obi-Wan Kenobi as Ben Kenobi, mad old guy who lives in the desert, and leads directly into, no, not directly into, but like establishes him as the character that we meet in Star Wars, as opposed to the hero of the prequel trilogy, and that's the direction I thought they'd go with first. I never saw them doing a young Han Solo because, newsflash, we know what young Han Solo looks like. So, what do you think?
I just think that these are dangerous things because they never really work very well, do they? I think you've got to have them as being very young. Like in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, you could have River Phoenix as a young Indiana Jones because he was young enough that we could disassociate the two. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, it was short enough that we didn't have to overly try and associate the two. But as soon as you do the young Indiana Jones, the young Chronicles, which I enjoyed a lot, it's hard to associate the two because the ages, the mannerisms, it starts to become. And so you end up with the thing is this young Han Solo, is it going to be someone trying to do Harrison Ford? Or is it going to be someone who's not going to be doing Harrison Ford enough? And you think, is this character really worth it?
But he's got to be a kid as well, hasn't he, really? Because, Harrison Ford was 35 when Star Wars came out.
Well, they've had people cast, haven't they? The casting's been done, hasn't it?
Yeah. It's, what's the guy called? Alden Ehrenreich is the name of the actor. He's I've never heard of him. The other character who's in there is Donald Glover from Community, and he's the young Lando Calrissian.
Yes.
Which, to be honest with you, wouldn't that be a better, more interesting film?
I think it probably would. I think, again, because we have less associationship with Lando, I just think it would work. While with, I don't know, I just don't see this working. I mean, even with Ben Kenobi, I mean, with Ewan McGregor, I mean, there was a lot of issues, especially if you take the age gaps and the like. And it sort of worked because he was part of an ensemble, so it wasn't such a big issue. But if it had just been him, I don't know. I mean, maybe you're right. Maybe if Han Solo had only appeared in The Force Awakens, then you did this as a young Han Solo, it would work. But when, as you say, you've already got, a fairly young Han Solo in New Hope, I don't know. I just think you've got to be careful with this. I think you can just start fragmenting your franchise too much. People aren't going to. I mean, you can go, not wanting to go back to, but going back to Carrie Fisher, you can see this whole issue that these actors embody these characters for people. You've got to be very careful if you're thinking about trying to make successes, if you start putting other people in and they're meant to be them. I mean, obviously Star Trek did it a different way by saying it's an alternate version of them, which was probably sensible because it allowed Pine to do something different, not better, but different. There's no offence to Pine, it was just not very well written, but I think you can do it like that. But when they're meant to be the younger genetic version, I don't know.
Yeah. No, I agree. Now, the date for this, the date for release for this is supposed to be May the 25th, 2018, which is 5 months after the release of Star Wars Episode 8, which Star Wars Episode 8 itself is supposed to be out this May. I suspect they will probably look at what's just happened with Rogue One and decide that the Christmas market is better.
Probably.
And for a Star Wars movie, particularly one that has a bit of a kind of a questionable concept, and I think they will push back the Han Solo movie to the 2018 Christmas. That's just my gut feeling about it. And make Christmas, the traditional Star Wars movie release. And they'll basically tie Christmas up for probably the best part of a decade, in much the same way as Doctor Who did on TV.
Yes, quite probably. Quite probably.
Oh, lovely. Ginger beer, not before time. So that's that basically. That's the situation with Star Wars these days. I've never read Kenobi, and I do fancy reading it, but there's a lot of novels around at the moment that I'm reading. I'm not sure if I were to buy a copy of Kenobi, where it would sit.
And it wouldn't.
In the hierarchy of things I have to read.
But it wouldn't sit within the new hierarchy of Star Wars anyway.
Well, no, of course, because it's been completely removed from the.
You'd be better off watching season 3 of Rebels, where I think Kenobi is appearing in the second half of the season, which at least that would be canon. And again, that would probably be a better way to have Solo.
Yeah, well, yes, indeed, yeah. I mean, I'm not that bothered about canon, to be honest with you. Having already been infused by things that aren't canon, I'm not that concerned about canon.
Well, my only reason I'm concerned about it is that the canon of that era, as I say, the animated stuff is very, very good. And I kind of like supporting that, while the novels were a bit here, there and everywhere.
Yeah.
But the latest canon, certainly between the films, has been during the prequels and after prequels, has been some of their strongest stuff for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say, if you get a chance, everyone out there, watch Rebels. Certainly watch the Clone Wars. The Clone Wars is probably the most creative and artistically stylized piece of Star Wars I've seen, but Rebels is good as well.
Yeah, and the Freemaker Adventures as well. It might not be as serious as Rebels or Clone Wars, but it's enjoyable, and it is definitely Star Wars. So there. And I'm on a big kind of Lego thing at the moment. I'm in the middle of building a Lego camper van, which was my birthday present. I'm playing Lego Dimensions, not as we speak, but around podcasts, and I'm looking forward to the Lego Batman movie.
But I think it's funny, isn't it? And I was thinking this a few weeks ago when we did the Doctor Who podcast, where I had the very same beer. We had this very interesting thing about how at one point, Doctor Who was television, and that really was all it was. But now Doctor Who is, as you've said a few weeks ago, it is Lego, it is Big Finish, it is, it is books, it has many various comics, it has various dimensions to it, which are all authorized. And this need to sort of have to canonize or to put tier to them is just now utterly redundant. If you want to feel that Doctor Who is best suited to you as Big Finish, then that's absolutely fine. You can still watch a television show, but you don't have to. There's no need to start putting a hierarchy anymore in any of this sort of stuff. If you enjoy the Lego Star Wars, that's great. You don't have to watch the films. There's only your own values that you're putting on them, and that's the kind of weird place to be. It's no longer that singular thing. I suppose to some degree it never was, because when Star Wars was running, there was still the comics, and which ran in a sort of very separate sort of universe, a very separate style, in the same way, Doctor Who monthlies, stories of Doctor Who have a very different sort of feel to them to the TV shows. But we need to get away from that, don't we? We need to get away from that, which is the most important one to us, which is, the one that we must consider to be the Bible, and everything else sits sort of around it. It's just no longer, we're no longer in that sort of world anymore. No. Same with Marvel, isn't it? You can love the Marvel films, you can love the comics. The comics are a different universe to the films. They're both valid, but it does, is one really more important than the other anymore? It's not. It's just what you prefer. We need to get away from value judgments. We need to get away from territory.
Territory, yes. I must say, just on the matter of Star Wars comics, produced by Marvel back in the 80s, I got a fantastic birthday card a couple of weeks ago from my sister, which was a Marvel comic. It must have been an old Marvel comic Star Wars cover, if not an actual one, then certainly an extremely good pastiche. It was so good. It's really, it really brightened up my modest collection of birthday cards, I have to say. It was just a good choice for my sister, who I don't think has been mentioned on the podcast nearly enough. Well, there you go. She, because previously her best card prior to that was probably in about 1993. No, that was my 18th. Probably about 1990, which had the legend "Christmas is." In fact, it wasn't even a birthday card. It was a Christmas card. Christmas is fun. Christmas is nifty. You're getting a card instead of a gifty. So yeah. Cards, eh? So, are we done on Star Wars this time then?
Yeah, I think we are.
Okay.
Unless you have anything else to say.
I don't think so. No, I mean we've got another podcast to do on Star Wars, and then we've got a year of a few things to do with Episode 8, which we can dip into throughout the.
Did the Star Destroyers bother you? Because I saw people getting really angry that the Star Destroyers didn't look like Star Destroyers enough. They were made out of paper.
Yeah. Let me think. No. No, I wasn't bothered by the Star Destroyers at all.
Good.
Yeah. The only thing I was bothered about was the pace early on for small audience members.
Well, that's what I felt. Small audiences and James McLean's were getting bored at the beginning.
I had to donate my phone to my son so he could maintain his interest in being sat in a darkened room with copious amounts of popcorn for 2 hours until things started going bang, basically. So.
Yeah, it wasn't a film really for children, was it?
No, it's not. Which is and it's a Star Wars film as well. So you need to. That is possibly something they may deal with. Do you think perhaps for some of the other spin-offs? I don't know, but
well, maybe they should. Maybe they should allow the main Star Wars to be
bang bang bang,
fairly fluffy and bang bang bang, and then make the other things a little more cerebral. But then, like I've said before, if you watch the Clone Wars or Rebels, there is the right mix of bang sort of character and elements of darkness in it, which I think are good in Star Wars.
Yeah, I agree. I think you need character stuff in Star Wars, definitely, because then you, and I mean character stuff done well, because then it gives you that, because you have the bang 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 bang, you have the plans, you have the droids, you have things hidden in other places that you have to go and find so you can find a way to defeat the bad guys, and then you got the magic stuff going on in the background, and magic stuff can be very fluffy and silly, or it can be dealt with in this kind of etheric, mysterious, spooky kind of a way. And if it's done that way, then it has more impact than if it's just fluffy magic, doesn't it?
Because it's a funny thing, because Star Wars sort of delves a lot into sort of archetypes, the because it obviously is based on sort of very serialized stuff. Yet the world itself is often an oppressive regime with people fighting and struggling against the odds, and so there is a sort of quite realistic background that people should end up not being totally archetypes, and maybe they were in the first films. To be fair, there isn't that much depth to Leia, Han, or Luke, really, apart from their roles, and certainly not in the prequels either. But in theory, there should be. As you start exploring that universe, you should be seeing that depth to some degree, and that issue. And yes, it's an interesting tension there between fantasy and, because people have said, I think it was, and I say on the podcast that we will be airing with John Muir, we were sort of saying this, that there's they always say Star Trek is about looking at as a reflection on cultural society, and Star Wars is sort of about a sort of anachronistic fantasy, which I think actually might have been his one of his articles I'd read. And there's that truth, but there is, to be fair to Star Wars, as you explore it, you should be sort of looking. You have to start unraveling some of that, don't you? You have to unravel that it's a real world in a lot of ways, even though it's fantastical. It is an oppressive regime. How do people react under that oppressive regime? Do you have to sort of try and demonstrate that? And I think Rogue One sort of had that balance. So it didn't do it too much, because there was like the two samurai sort of the samurai character and his colleague. You never really got the feeling of how they felt about having their entire city wiped out. There was never any sort of real feeling of sort of thought on that. Yeah, at the same time, maybe you didn't need that because it needed to move along. It needed that action pace. So it's about balancing out what is necessary for characters, what's necessary for action. I don't know. I think you might as well leave me out of the next Star Wars one.
No, we will have you on the next Star Wars one. I'm just having a look at some of the cameos and things. Richard Franklin was in there.
Mm-hmm.
I never spotted him. Oh, that's lovely. Captain Yates from Doctor Who, Richard Franklin, is one of the Death Star engineers. There you go. We'll leave it there for this week's this month's Beyond Casterbarus. We will be back talking about Rogue One. Hopefully next month. About Rogue One, though.
I'd like them to have had Benton in there. I like the episode to event because it's Disney. They could have done like Marvel, and they could have had one of their little Easter egg outro bits. And it could have just been, they could have just taken that last scene from the Time Monster and just stuck it at the end of Star Wars. I don't know why. If they just had Benton, it's just, there's something sort of sweet about Benton, which I think would make any film ending feel, I don't know, brighter. And it's quite a dark ending. So a naked Sergeant Benton.
We will leave it there. Until next time, it's goodbye.